In December 1805, on the fields of Austerlitz, the air is thick with the acrid stench of gunpowder, and the screams of dying soldiers echo across frost-covered hills. Cannons roar, horses neigh, and the earth trembles under the chaos of battle. At the top of a hill stands a solitary figure, cloaked in gray, his piercing eyes coldly surveying the carnage below. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of France, a man the world hails as a genius, a liberator, a god of war. But among the thousands of shattered bodies, soldiers who trusted in his vision, a darker truth begins to emerge. His victories, carved in blood, are accompanied by whispers of scorched cities, annihilated armies, and nations that bent under fear and betrayal. Every one of his triumphal marches leaves behind a trail of horrors that history cannot erase. What drove this man down the path of destruction? What force within his soul turned a dream of greatness into a nightmare for millions? If you're fascinated by the untold stories of the giants of history, those who built empires and destroyed worlds, hit like and subscribe to uncover more raw truths that reveal the hidden essence of our past. Let us know in the comments where you're joining from. It's incredible to think that we're together, from different corners of the globe, exploring the shadows of history, united by curiosity about those who shaped our world and the price they paid for doing so. This isn't just a story of a fallen commander or emperor. It's a plunge into the heart of ambition run wild, a tale of how one man's dream of greatness became a continent's living nightmare. The name Napoleon has become a synonym for triumph, but behind the glitter of victory lies a dark truth: betrayals, massacres, and an obsession with power that left scars across Europe for generations. This is the story of a man who couldn't stop, whose unrelenting thirst for glory transformed him from liberator to tyrant. His life is not just a chronicle of victories, but a testament to the horrors he unleashed, reminding us that even the greatest minds can sow unspeakable suffering. Born in 1769 on the rugged island of Corsica, Napoleon Bonaparte was not an aristocrat destined for greatness. The second son of a minor noble family, he grew up in a world where Corsica's proud independence clashed with French rule. As a boy, he was skinny, well-read, and fiercely proud. His sharp mind devoured books on military history, and his heart dreamed of glory far beyond the narrow confines of his island. At 9, he was sent to a French military academy, a scholarship student from a poor background mocked for his Corsican accent and humble manners. But even in those early years, his teachers saw a spark in him, a fire in his eyes, a relentless drive to prove he was greater than his circumstances. When the French Revolution tore apart the old order in 1789, Napoleon saw his chance in the chaos. At 24, as a captain of artillery, he led an assault during the siege of Toulon in 1793. His daring strategy brought victory and the rank of general, making him a hero of the young republic. For the French, exhausted by war and division, he became a symbol of hope, a son of the revolution, unburdened by noble blood, who vowed to protect liberty from monarchs and invaders alike. He reformed armies, crushed bureaucracy, and spoke of France's greatness with such passion that he inspired thousands. But Napoleon's ambition was insatiable. By 1798, at just 29, defending the Republic was no longer enough. He dreamed of an empire, of outshining Alexander the Great, of etching his name into history with fire and steel. His Italian campaigns stunned the world. Fast, brutal victories brought France wealth and fame. Yet even in these triumphs, shadows loomed. From Italy came rumors of pillaged villages, executed prisoners, and alliances betrayed when no longer convenient. The man who once defended freedom began to see himself as its master, answerable to no one. The seeds of his downfall were sown not in defeat, but in the intoxicating high of victory, where every triumph only deepened his hunger for more and prepared Europe for the horrors he would soon unleash. By 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte's star was rising, but two forces were about to collide in his life, pushing him toward a path of unparalleled destruction. The first was his burning love for Josephine de Beauharnais, a woman whose charm and cunning ensnared his heart in a way no battlefield ever could. Their marriage in 1796 had been a whirlwind of passion. Napoleon, a 26-year-old general, was captivated by her elegance, her wit, and her ability to navigate the treacherous salons of revolutionary Paris. But Josephine was no mere muse. She was a survivor, a widow who had narrowly escaped the guillotine, and her independence both thrilled and tormented him. His letters to her from the Italian campaigns were feverish, obsessive, pleading for her affection while she remained distant, rumored to be unfaithful. This unrequited devotion gnawed at Napoleon, fueling a need to prove himself not just to France, but to her. The second catalyst was his audacious Egyptian campaign, launched in 1798 to disrupt British trade routes and cement his legacy as a conqueror of exotic lands. He sailed to Egypt with dreams of emulating Alexander the Great, envisioning himself as a liberator bringing enlightenment to the East. But the campaign was a gamble, born of his restless ambition and a desire to escape the whispers of Josephine's betrayals. In Egypt, his genius for strategy clashed with his growing ruthlessness. The campaign would reveal a darker Napoleon, one who would order massacres, betray allies, and leave thousands to die in the desert, all to feed his vision of eternal glory. The sands of Egypt would be stained with blood, and Josephine's hold over his heart would drive him to acts that horrified even his loyal soldiers. Napoleon, at this stage, was no longer the provincial boy from Corsica but a man teetering on the edge of greatness and ruin. At 29, he was a paradox, a revolutionary hero who dreamed of empire, a lover consumed by a woman who could never fully be his. His soldiers adored him, calling him the Little Corporal for his willingness to share their hardships. Yet his inner circle saw a man increasingly isolated by his own ambition. His vulnerability lay not in his military skill but in his heart and mind. Josephine's indifference wounded him deeply. Her rumored affairs in Paris while he campaigned in Italy left him humiliated, his pride as a Corsican man stinging with every whispered gossip. He poured his soul into letters begging for her love, only to receive cool, evasive replies. This emotional turmoil made him desperate to prove his worth, to build a legacy so grand that even Josephine could not ignore it. His vulnerability extended to his relentless need for validation. The French Directory, the shaky government he served, distrusted his growing fame, and Napoleon knew his position was precarious. Every victory had to be grander, every campaign more daring, to secure his place in a nation still reeling from revolution. Egypt was his chance to transcend mere generalship, to become a myth. But this hunger for glory made him reckless, willing to sacrifice men, morals, and entire cities to achieve it. Beneath the confident commander was a man haunted by the fear of being forgotten, a vulnerability that would unleash horrors on those who followed him. The Egyptian campaign marked the moment when Napoleon's ambition curdled into something monstrous. In July 1798, he landed in Alexandria with 40,000 men, promising to liberate Egypt from Mamluk rule and bring the ideals of the French Revolution. But the reality was far grimmer. The desert heat was merciless, water scarce, and disease rampant. His soldiers, expecting glory, found themselves dying of thirst and dysentery, their loyalty tested as Napoleon pushed them deeper into an alien land. When he faced resistance at Jaffa in March 1799, his response was chilling. After capturing the city, he ordered the execution of over 2,000 Ottoman prisoners, men who had surrendered under promises of mercy. His soldiers, horrified, were forced to bayonet or shoot the captives on the beach, their bodies left to rot under the sun. Napoleon justified it as a necessity, claiming he lacked resources to hold prisoners, but the cold calculation in his orders revealed a man who saw human lives as pawns in his grand game. This was not an isolated act. In Cairo, he suppressed uprisings with brutal efficiency, ordering public executions and displaying severed heads to cow the population. His dream of a French empire in the east crumbled as the British Navy destroyed his fleet at Abu Qir Bay, trapping his army. Yet Napoleon abandoned his men, slipping back to France in 1799 to seize power in a coup, leaving thousands to die in the desert or fall to disease. The campaign's horrors, massacres, starvation, betrayal, were a direct result of his ambition, a transformation from revolutionary hero to a leader who would sacrifice anything for power. His soldiers, once his brothers in arms, began to whisper of a man who cared more for his legacy than their lives. Josephine, too, felt the weight of his transformation. His letters from Egypt grew colder, his obsession with her now mixed with a ruthless determination to control everything, even love. On December 2, 1804, the Grand Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris shimmered with gold and incense, its ancient stones bearing witness to a spectacle that would echo through history. Napoleon Bonaparte, once a son of the Revolution, stood before a sea of dignitaries, his crimson and ermine robe trailing like a river of blood. In a moment that stunned the world, he snatched the imperial crown from Pope Pius V's hands and placed it on his own head, declaring himself Emperor of the French. The crowd, nobles, generals, and foreign ambassadors, gasped, their forced smiles barely concealing unease. This was no mere coronation. It was a defiant act of self-apotheosis, a man proclaiming himself greater than kings, gods, or republics. Beside him sat Josephine, adorned in diamonds, her beauty a silent testament to the man who had reshaped Europe to win her gaze. Yet, beneath the opulence, whispers circulated of the horrors that funded this moment. Villages burned in Italy, prisoners slaughtered in Egypt, and a French people increasingly crushed under taxes to fuel his endless wars. The coronation was a dazzling mask, hiding a truth that chilled those who knew it. Napoleon's empire was built on blood, and its cost was only beginning to be paid. The ceremony was a masterpiece of propaganda, with ermine-draped marshals, silk banners embroidered with golden bees, and choirs singing hymns to his glory. Napoleon had orchestrated every detail, from the specially crafted crown to the presence of the Pope, whose reluctant attendance lent divine legitimacy to a man who had betrayed the revolution's ideals. To onlookers, it was a moment of triumph, but to those who had seen the fields of Jaffa or the starving soldiers of Egypt, it was a grotesque parade of power, a reminder that this emperor would stop at nothing to cement his legacy, even if it meant turning liberty into tyranny. Beneath the imperial grandeur, Napoleon was a man at war with himself. He had been born of the revolution, raised on ideals of liberty and equality, yet now he sat on a throne, surrounded by sycophants who bowed to his every whim. In private moments, he wrestled with this contradiction. Late at night, in his opulent chambers, he would pace before maps of Europe, his mind racing with dreams of a unified continent under his rule. A new Rome, with him as its Caesar. But doubts gnawed at him. Josephine's continued indifference, despite her new title as empress, left him hollow. Her inability to bear an heir fueled fears that his dynasty would crumble. He saw enemies everywhere. British fleets, Russian tsars, even his own generals, whose loyalty he questioned as his ambitions grew ever grander. Yet Napoleon's resilience was formidable. Each setback, whether the loss of his fleet in Egypt or the growing unrest in France, only sharpened his resolve. He adapted, manipulated, and conquered. He reorganized armies, crafted the Napoleonic Code to bind his empire legally, and charmed foreign courts with his charisma. Even as he crushed dissent with secret police and censored newspapers, he convinced himself it was for the greater good, a necessary sacrifice to preserve his vision. His soldiers, though weary, still followed him, mesmerized by his ability to snatch victory from chaos. But this resilience came at a cost. Every decision to silence a critic, execute a rebel, or march an army to its doom hardened him, eroding the young idealist who had once dreamed of liberating nations. The man who crowned himself emperor was no longer the little corporal. He was a ruler who saw himself as destiny incarnate, willing to burn the world to prove it. Napoleon's coronation was not the pinnacle of his power, but a prelude to greater horrors. His insatiable ambition drove the Napoleonic Wars into a new phase of destruction, with the 1812 Russian campaign standing as a monument to his hubris. Convinced he could force Russia to bend to his continental system, a blockade to cripple Britain, he led an army of 600,000 men, the Grand Army, into the Russian heartland. What followed was a catastrophe that shocked Europe. The Russians, using scorched earth tactics, burned their own fields and villages to starve Napoleon's army. By the time he reached Moscow in September 1812, the city was a smoldering ruin, set ablaze to deny him victory. His soldiers, ravaged by hunger, disease, and relentless Cossack attacks began to falter. The retreat from Moscow became a death march, with freezing winters claiming tens of thousands. Corpses littered the snow, some frozen where they fell, others torn apart by wolves or desperate survivors. By December, fewer than 50,000 of the Grand Army returned, their skeletal frames a testament to Napoleon's folly. The Russian campaign was not just a military disaster. It was a humanitarian catastrophe that reverberated across Europe. Entire regions were devastated as Napoleon's armies pillaged for supplies, leaving civilians to starve. His allies, forced into submission by his empire, began to turn against him, sensing weakness. In France, taxes and conscription drained the nation, fueling resentment among the very people who had once cheered him. Napoleon's dream of a unified Europe crumbled, replaced by a legacy of destruction. Millions dead, economies shattered, and nations scarred by his relentless wars. The man who had crowned himself emperor had become a symbol of ruin, his ambition a fire that consumed everything in its path. On June 18, 1815, the fields of Waterloo, a muddy expanse south of Brussels, became the stage for Napoleon Bonaparte's final gamble. After escaping exile on Elba and reclaiming power in France for a fleeting 100 days, he faced a coalition of British, Prussian, and Allied forces determined to crush his empire once and for all. The air was thick with rain and gunpowder. The ground churned into a quagmire by hooves and boots. Napoleon, now 45, stood defiant, his once sharp features worn by years of war, his eyes still burning with the belief that he could bend fate to his will. He threw everything into the battle, 80,000 men, his finest generals, and the remnants of his dream of a unified Europe. But the odds were merciless. The British under Wellington held their ground, and Prussian reinforcements under Blücher arrived to seal his fate. By nightfall, the French army was shattered, with over 25,000 of Napoleon's men dead or wounded, their bodies strewn across the blood-soaked fields alongside thousands of Allied casualties. The sight was apocalyptic. Horses screaming, soldiers crawling through the mud, and the emperor himself, for the first time, fleeing a battlefield in defeat. This was no mere military loss. It was the death of Napoleon's empire. As he rode away, his cloak stained with mud, he knew the dream that had driven him through Italy, Egypt, Russia, and beyond was over. Waterloo was his final act of defiance, a desperate attempt to reclaim glory that cost tens of thousands their lives. The horror of the battle lay not just in the carnage but in its futility. Napoleon's ambition, once a force that reshaped nations, had led him to sacrifice his loyal soldiers for a cause already lost. The man who had crowned himself emperor now faced the abyss of his own making, his legacy reduced to a field of corpses and a broken empire. Days after Waterloo, Napoleon abdicated for the second time, his power crumbling like the ashes of Moscow. Exiled to St. Helena, a remote speck in the South Atlantic, he spent his final years in a damp, rat-infested house, far from the palaces of Paris. The man who had once commanded millions now dictated memoirs to a handful of loyalists, his body ravaged by illness, his mind haunted by the past. He died in 1821 at 51, likely of stomach cancer, alone except for a few servants and the ghosts of his ambitions. On St. Helena, he reflected on his life, claiming he had sought only to spread the revolution's ideals. Yet the truth was undeniable. His wars had killed millions, soldiers, civilians, entire communities wiped out by famine, disease, and conquest. France was left bankrupt, its youth decimated by conscription, its borders smaller than when he began. Europe bore the scars of his ambition. Economies ruined, nations reshaped by force, and a generation traumatized by endless war. Yet Napoleon's legacy is a paradox. His Napoleonic Code reformed legal systems across the world, spreading ideas of equality before the law, even as he crushed dissent. His vision of a unified Europe, though born of conquest, planted seeds for modern nation-states. But these achievements came at a horrific cost. The massacres in Jaffa, the starvation in Russia, the slaughter at Waterloo. These were not mere footnotes but the heart of his story, a testament to how unchecked ambition can turn a visionary into a tyrant. History remembers Napoleon as both a genius and a monster, a man who built an empire on the bones of millions. His story is a warning. Even the greatest dreams can become nightmares when pursued without restraint. Napoleon's life is a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting the heights of ambition and the depths of destruction. What do you think of his story? Did his genius justify the horrors he unleashed, or was he a cautionary tale of power unchecked? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know where you're joining me from. If you're moved by the hidden truths of history, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that uncover the past's darkest corners. Let's keep exploring the lives that shaped our world, together across time and space. The morning of June 18, 1815, dawned gray and sodden over the fields of Waterloo, a muddy plain south of Brussels that would become the graveyard of Napoleon Bonaparte's dreams. After escaping his first exile on the island of Elba in March, he had returned to France, rallying loyalists for a fleeting 100 days of restored power. Now, at 45, he faced a coalition of British, Prussian, and Allied forces determined to end his reign forever. The air hung heavy with the threat of rain. The ground churned into a quagmire by the boots of 80,000 French soldiers and the hooves of their cavalry. Napoleon, his once youthful frame thickened by years of relentless campaigning, stood on a rise, his piercing eyes scanning the battlefield with a mix of defiance and desperation. This was his last chance to reclaim the glory that had slipped through his fingers, through Egypt, Russia, and a dozen other blood-soaked campaigns. He threw everything into the fight. His finest generals, his veteran troops, and the remnants of a vision that had once promised a unified Europe under his rule. The battle began with a roar of cannons, the sky splitting with smoke and fire. Napoleon's strategy was bold. Split the Allied lines, crush the British under Wellington, and scatter the Prussians before they could unite. But the mud slowed his artillery, and the British held firm behind their ridges. Hours passed in a brutal dance of bayonets, grapeshot, and cavalry charges. By afternoon, the fields were a slaughterhouse. Horses screamed, their entrails spilling into the mire. Soldiers fell in heaps, their faces frozen in agony, and the wounded crawled through the muck, begging for mercy that never came. When Prussian reinforcements under Blücher arrived, the tide turned. Napoleon's army broke, fleeing in chaos as the coalition closed in. By nightfall, over 25,000 French soldiers lay dead or wounded, their bodies mingling with 15,000 Allied casualties in a tableau of carnage that stretched for miles. The emperor, for the first time in his storied career, fled the battlefield, his cloak soaked with mud, his face ashen with the realization that his empire was lost. Waterloo was more than a defeat. It was an apocalypse of Napoleon's making. The battle's horror lay not just in the staggering death toll, 40,000 men in a single day, but in its futility. These were not soldiers fighting for liberty, as in the revolution's early days, but men sacrificed for a man's obsession with reclaiming a fading dream. Napoleon had led them to their deaths, knowing the odds were against him, driven by a refusal to accept that his time had passed. The fields of Waterloo, littered with broken swords and lifeless bodies, were a mirror of his soul, a man who had reshaped the world, only to shatter it in his final act of defiance. As he rode away, pursued by enemies and haunted by failure, Napoleon faced the truth he had long evaded. His ambition, once a beacon of hope, had become a force of destruction, leaving behind a legacy written in blood. In the days following Waterloo, Napoleon's world collapsed. On June 22, 1815, he abdicated for the second time, his throne reduced to a memory, his empire a ruin. The Allies, wary of his ability to rally France again, banished him to St. Helena, a desolate rock in the South Atlantic, 1,200 miles from the nearest land. There, in a damp, wind-swept house plagued by rats, the man who had once dined in Parisian palaces spent his final years. No longer the commander of millions, Napoleon dictated memoirs to a dwindling circle of loyalists, his voice still sharp but his body wasting away, likely from stomach cancer. He died on May 5, 1821, at 51, His last words a faint murmur of "France Army, Josephine," as if his mind lingered on the dreams and loves that had driven him to ruin. In exile, Napoleon had time to reflect, though his reflections were tinged with self-justification. He claimed his wars were fought to spread the ideals of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity. But the truth was undeniable, etched in the scars of a continent. His campaigns had killed an estimated 3 to 6 million people. Soldiers cut down in battles like Austerlitz and Borodino, civilians starved by blockades like the Continental System, entire communities wiped out by the famines and diseases that followed his armies. In Jaffa, he had ordered the slaughter of 2,000 prisoners. In Russia, he had led 600,000 men to their doom, leaving fewer than 50,000 to limp home. France itself was broken, its treasury drained, its youth decimated by conscription, its borders smaller than when he seized power. Europe bore the wounds of his ambition. Economies shattered, cities reduced to rubble, and nations reshaped by force, from Spain to Poland, in a relentless quest for dominance. Yet Napoleon's legacy defies simple judgment. His Napoleonic Code, a legal framework born of revolutionary ideals, reformed justice systems across Europe and beyond, embedding principles of equality before the law that endure today. His vision of a unified Europe, though pursued through conquest, foreshadowed modern nation-states and centralized governance. He modernized armies, education, and administration, leaving a blueprint for the modern state. But these achievements were inseparable from their cost. The massacres in Jaffa, the burning of Moscow, the slaughter at Waterloo. These were not anomalies but the essence of his rule, a testament to how genius can curdle into tyranny when ambition knows no bounds. His allies, once coerced into his empire, turned against him. His people, once inspired, grew weary of endless war. Napoleon's name became a paradox, a symbol of revolutionary hope and imperial ruin, a man who built a new world on the graves of millions. His story resonates not because of his victories, but because of its human cost. The soldiers who died in the Russian snows, the civilians starved by his blockades, the families torn apart by conscription. These were the true price of his empire. Napoleon's life is a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the greatest minds can sow unimaginable suffering when driven by unchecked ambition. History remembers him as both a titan and a tragedy, a man whose dreams of glory left a continent in mourning. His legacy asks us to weigh the cost of greatness, to question whether any vision, no matter how grand, can justify the horrors it unleashes. Napoleon's life is a mirror to our own ambitions, reflecting the thin line between greatness and destruction. What do you make of his story? Did his reforms justify the millions who perished, or was he a warning of what happens when power consumes a soul? Share your thoughts in the comments, and tell me where you're joining me from. Let's connect across the globe to unravel history's darkest truths. If you're haunted by the lives that shaped our world, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that peel back the past's glittering myths to reveal its brutal realities. Together, let's keep exploring the shadows of history, where the echoes of ambition and tragedy still linger.